It starts with a sound. For me, everything starts with a sound. Not a big crashing chord, but the almost imperceptible hiss of a vintage amplifier warming up. It's a sound like a held breath, a promise of what's to come. For 10 years, the sound I lived for was the one Jet made. That raw, beautiful, chaotic noise that he called music. I was the one who captured it, polished it, gave it a home. I was his sound engineer, his producer, his wife, and in the end, I was just the hiss of the amplifier, the part he decided he could do without. My name is Thea, and this is the story of how my rockstar ex-husband tried to erase me from our life's work, and how I proved that the ghost in the machine is sometimes the one who holds the deed to the whole haunted house. The end of my marriage didn't sound like a crashing guitar or a final mournful piano chord. It sounded like the slick, expensive rustle of paper. Divorce papers, to be exact, slid across the marble countertop of the kitchen I had designed. In the house, my careful savings had secured the down payment for. Jet stood on the other side of the island, all leather-clad, restless energy. His hair, that famous black mane that graced a dozen magazine covers, was perfectly disheveled. He looked every inch the rock god, and I, in my worn-out band t-shirt and faded jeans, with sound-dampening headphones, permanently indenting my hair, felt like a roadie who had overstayed her welcome. He tapped a manicured finger on the thickest part of the document. "It's all pretty standard, Thea," he said, his voice that familiar gravelly purr that sold millions of albums. "My lawyer, bless his blood-sucking heart, has been very thorough. I didn't need to read it. My own lawyer, a far less expensive and far more sympathetic woman named Maya, had already walked me through the carnage. I got the car, a sensible sedan I'd bought myself. I got to keep my personal equipment, the mixing boards and preamps he considered my little hobbies, and that was it. No alimony, no stake in his future earnings, and most pointedly, not a single cent from the upcoming album, Phoenix Rising. The irony was so thick, I could have sampled it and made a bass drop. The album is a fresh start, you see," Jet continued, oblivious to the thunderous silence in the room. He started pacing, a habit he had when he was working up a monologue. "It's pure, it's me, raw, unfiltered. Your perfectionism, babe. It was a gilded cage. You were sanding down the splinters, but the splinters are where the soul is. You were trying to make it perfect. Rock and roll isn't perfect. It's visceral." Visceral. That was his new favorite word, probably fed to him by his new 22-year-old manager, a guy named Kip, who wore sunglasses indoors and thought vinyl was a retro-themed app. For 10 years, my perfectionism was what he called Thea's magic. It was my magic that turned his 3-chord drunken ramblings into anthems. It was my magic that found the melody buried under layers of feedback and ego. It was my magic that spent 60 hours a week in our custom-built home studio, meticulously layering, equalizing, and compressing, until the raw noise became a sonic masterpiece. I finally looked down at the signature line. He'd made sure to include a clause, highlighted in aggressive yellow, explicitly stating that all work on Phoenix Rising was composed and produced solely by Jet Stryker. It was a legal wall built to keep me out, a declaration of independence. "I get it," I said, my voice quiet, flat. I didn't recognize it. It was a frequency I hadn't heard from myself before. "You want a fresh start." He stopped pacing, a flicker of relief crossing his face. He expected a fight. He craved the drama, screaming, crying, throwing things. That was the kind of visceral he understood. Quiet acceptance was a language he didn't speak. "Exactly. I knew you'd get it. You were always the smart one." He leaned across the counter, trying for a moment of our old intimacy. "Look, this isn't about us, Thea. Not the good parts. This is about the art. My art. It needs to breathe. And you," he searched for the right words, "the kindest possible blade. You were holding your hand over its mouth. With love." But still, I just nodded, pushing the papers back toward him. "Sign it, Jet. Go be visceral." He wanted a reaction so badly, I could feel the pull of it, like a magnetic field. But I was empty. The fight had been drained out of me. Over the last year of his escalating moods, his dismissiveness, his casual cruelties, dressed up as artistic temperament. The man who once wrote a song, because he loved the way I hummed, when I was concentrating now, looked at me like I was a technical problem he couldn't solve, so he was unplugging the whole system. He signed his name with a flamboyant flourish, the black ink a stark final slash, and just like that, a decade of my life was legally nullified. He left without another word, the front door closing with a soft, expensive click. I stood there in the cavernous kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears, louder than any concert. It was over. He had won. He had erased me. He forgot, however, about the ghosts. He forgot that during our marriage, while he was the star, I was the one who learned to haunt our own house, our own music, our own life. And he forgot that I was the one who knew how to make the ghosts sing. The divorce wasn't the end. It was just the moment the amplifier finished warming up. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about survival. It wouldn't become about revenge until much, much later. The weeks that followed the signing were a blur of muted gray. I moved out of the house, the one with the marble countertops and the soundproofed basement studio, and into a small, functional apartment across town. It was the kind of place with beige walls and standard-issue appliances that hummed at a slightly off-key B-flat. For a sound engineer, it was a special kind of torture. I packed my life into cardboard boxes, each one feeling heavier than the last. Taping them shut felt like sealing away parts of myself. The box of old tour laminates, the box of photographs of us, young and hopeful, in front of our first real studio. The box labeled Studio Spares, full of esoteric cables and vintage microphone tubes that only I knew how to source. My lawyer, Maya, was my rock. She was sharp, pragmatic, and had a way of cutting through emotional fog with a surgeon's precision. And she had a sleek, minimalist office that felt like the aesthetic opposite of my cluttered, creative life. "He's a piece of work, Thea," she said, handing me a cup of tea that tasted like quiet competence. "He were reviewing the final decree one last time. This clause about the album, it's vindictive. It's designed to hurt you, not just protect him. It's his art, Maya," I mumbled, repeating his words like a catechism I was forced to learn. "It needs to breathe." Maya snorted, a very unlawyerly sound. "His art needed you to give it CPR for the last 10 years. Don't buy into his self-aggrandizing nonsense. He's a brand, and he's protecting it. The problem is, he thinks you were an employee, not a partner." She leaned forward, her expression softening. "Thea, I know this is devastating, but the man you built that life with doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. You're grieving a ghost." Her words hit a little too close to home. Ghost. The word echoed in the quiet of my new apartment. It was during those long, lonely nights, surrounded by boxes I had no energy to unpack, that the flashbacks started to come. They weren't gentle or nostalgic. They were vivid, raw, and full of sounds I had tried to forget. I'd be trying to sleep, and suddenly, I was back in the studio at 3 a.m. The air is thick with the smell of old coffee, ozone from the electronics, and Jet's expensive whiskey. He slumped on the leather couch, half asleep, having declared himself creatively drained after singing the main vocal track 3 times. The track is good, but it's thin. It's a skeleton. He called it a day, kissing me on the forehead and mumbling something about me locking up. But I didn't lock up. For me, that's when the real work began. I'd sit in the captain's chair, the massive mixing console lit up before me like a spaceship cockpit. I'd listen to his vocal, that powerful, charismatic voice, and I'd hear the empty spaces, the places where a harmony could lift the chorus, where a subtle instrumental counter-melody could add a layer of melancholy he was aiming for but couldn't articulate. He'd call them ghost tracks. It was his term, meant to be dismissive. "Hey, can you add some of your little ghost harmonies in the bridge, just to give it some shimmer? Or this guitar solo feels lonely. Weave one of your spooky synth pads underneath it. you know. He thought it was decoration, wallpaper. He had no concept of the theory behind it. He didn't understand that the specific harmony I chose, a suspended fourth resolving to a minor third, was what created the feeling of unresolved tension that critics would later praise as haunting. He didn't know that the spooky synth pad was actually a heavily processed recording of a wine glass, reversed and pitched down, a texture that gave the song its unique, unsettling atmosphere. I was the architect of the song's emotional depth, and he thought I was just the interior decorator. I remembered one night in particular, working on a song that would become his biggest hit, Echo in a Jar. He had the main melody and the lyrics, a rambling poem about lost love. He recorded it with a single acoustic guitar and went to bed. I stayed up for the next 48 hours, fueled by caffeine and a burning need to make the song what I knew it could be. I laid down 3 separate harmony tracks with my own voice, pitched and processed, so they sounded less like a human and more like a sorrowful wind. I programmed a subtle drum machine beat that was more of a heartbeat than a rhythm. I took an old, out-of-tune piano we had in the corner and recorded myself playing single, sustained notes, letting them decay into silence, and then layered them into the verses. I added a quiet, intricate bass line that moved in counterpoint to his vocal melody. When he heard it 2 days later, his eyes went wide. "Whoa, where did all that come from?" he asked, genuinely amazed. My heart swelled with a stupid, hopeful pride. "I just heard it in my head," I said. "I thought it's what the song needed." He grinned, that killer rockstar grin. "It's magic, babe. Effing magic." He kissed me, hard. "You're my secret weapon." Secret. That was the key word. Not partner, not co-writer. Weapon. A tool to be used. The praise was intoxicating, but it was always framed that way. It was my magic, my secret, my trick. It was never our song. It was his song, improved by my mysterious, unquantifiable touch. He loved the results, but he refused to acknowledge the science, the skill, the artistry behind it. To him, what he did was songwriting. What I did was fairy dust. This pattern repeated itself for years. On every album, he would provide the raw, charismatic talent, and I would provide the depth, the texture, the soul, and I let him. I basked in his praise, in the success of our music. I loved him, and I thought my contribution was an act of love, something that didn't need a name or a credit. I was a fool. I see that now. It's a special kind of blindness that love gives you. You accept a supporting role because you're so invested in the star's success. You convince yourself that the reflected light is the same as the warmth of the sun. It isn't. Reflected light is cold. It has no heat of its own. Its catalyst came on a Tuesday. About a month after I'd moved, I was in my car, driving to the grocery store, trying to feel normal. The radio was on, a local rock station, and then I heard it. It's DJ's slick, over-eager voice. And now, the world premiere you've all been waiting for. The first single from Jet Striker's triumphant new solo album, Phoenix Rising. This one's called Ashes and Glasses. My hands gripped the steering wheel. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart hammering against my ribs. A distorted, angry guitar riff ripped through the speakers, raw, just like he promised. And his voice came in, snarling the lyrics. It was powerful. I'll give him that. But it was thin. It was just a skeleton. Then the first chorus hit, and underneath his lead vocal, so subtle you could almost miss it, was a harmony. A soaring, ethereal harmony that lifted the angry lyrics into something tragic and beautiful. And then a synth pad swelled, a shimmering, textured sound in that filled the empty space behind the guitar. I started to tremble. I knew that harmony. I had written it. I knew that synth pad. I had designed it. It was from a demo session about 8 months ago, before everything fell apart. Jet had been stuck on the chorus, and I, like always, had stayed late and worked my magic. I'd recorded a guide vocal for the harmony and created the synth texture, saving it to the master session file. He had apparently just used it. He had taken my ghost tracks, my secret ingredients, and passed them off as his own raw, unfiltered genius. He hadn't even bothered to re-record them. I could hear the faint, telltale digital artifacts from the exact plugin I used. It was my work, my voice, my arrangement, my sound, and he was claiming it, all of it, as his own. He hadn't just divorced me. He hadn't just cut me out financially. He had plagiarized the very soul I'd poured into his music. He was a thief. In that moment, parked on the side of a busy road, with the sound of my own stolen creativity blasting from the cheap speakers of my sensible sedan, something inside me shifted. The grief, the emptiness, the resignation, it all burned away. And in its place, a single, cold, crystalline thought formed. It was a thought as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He thinks I'm a ghost. Fine. It's time to show him what a ghost can do. The grief had been a fog, but the anger was a lens. Suddenly, I could see everything with perfect, painful clarity. All those years, I'd spent convincing myself that my contribution was an act of love, an unspoken part of our partnership. It was a lie. I told myself to feel essential. Jet's narrative was simpler and far more brutal. I was a paid technician, a skilled one, sure, but in his mind, my work was no different from the person who tuned his guitars, or the guy who set up the microphones. It was a service rendered. The fact that we were married was incidental. That was the thought that turned the key. If I was just a service provider, then I should have been treated like one. And service providers have contracts. They have rights. They have paperwork. This is where the story pivots from one of heartbreak to one of foresight. It wasn't a grand, Machiavellian scheme I'd been cooking up for years. It was a quiet act of self-preservation, born out of a single moment of doubt. About 2 years before the divorce, Jet had just done a big interview for a music magazine. The journalist had asked him about his creative process, specifically about the layered, atmospheric soundscapes on our last album. I remember my heart giving a little flutter of anticipation. He'll mention me, I thought. He'll finally give me public credit. I can still picture him, lounging in his favorite armchair, the reporter sitting opposite him. It's all about instinct, man, Jet had said, gesturing with his hands. I just hear these sounds in my head, these textures, these other voices. I just channel them. The songs tell me what they need to be. He didn't mention me once. He absorbed my work, my hours, my creativity, and presented it to the world as a mystical gift from the ether. I was not his partner. I was a voice in his head. I felt a cold dread creep over me that day. It was the first time I truly understood that he didn't see my contribution as a contribution at all. He saw it as an extension of himself. That night, after he was asleep, I sat in the studio, the glowing console, my only company. I thought about the nature of creative work. A lyricist gets a credit. A composer gets a credit. Even a session musician who plays a 30-second solo gets a credit and a fee. What I did fell into a gray area. It was more than engineering, but Jet held the monopoly on the songwriting credit. So I started researching. I fell down a rabbit hole of music publishing law, copyright, and performance rights organizations. I learned about the distinction between the composition copyright, the song itself, melody, and lyrics, and the sound recording copyright, the specific master recording. And I learned about ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. I learned that an arrangement can, in some cases, be considered a derivative work, granting the arranger a share of the songwriting royalties. It's a complex and often debated area of music law. A perfect place to hide in plain sight. An arranger who significantly alters the character of a composition, adding new harmonic structure or substantial melodic content, can be considered a co-writer. My ghost tracks weren't just fairy dust. They were counter-melodies. They were complex harmonic stacks. They were foundational rhythmic structures. They were, by any reasonable definition, significant contributions to the arrangement. On at least half a dozen of his most famous songs, the part everyone remembered, the haunting synth line, the soaring vocal harmony in the chorus, was mine. So I did something. It felt sneaky at the time. It felt like a betrayal of the trust I thought we had. Now, I see it for what it was. The first time I ever truly valued my own work. I went online to the ASCAP portal. For every song where I had composed a significant new part, a core harmony, a new instrumental hook, a foundational pad that defined the song's mood, he registered my arrangement. I listed Jet Strikers as the primary songwriter, of course, but I added a second writer, an arranger. I used my maiden name, Thea Evans. I filled out the forms meticulously, detailing my percentage claim for the arrangement. For some tracks, I claimed a modest 10%. For others, like Echo in a Jar, where my work was practically the entire backbone of the track, I claimed 25%. I did this for nearly 20 songs over the course of our last 3 albums together. I never told him. It was my secret insurance policy. A little stash of self-respect I'd squirreled away for a rainy day. I suppose deep down, I knew the storm was coming. The memory of it hit me with the force of a physical blow as I sat in my car, listening to Ashes and Glass. He had used my demoed harmony, a harmony from a session for the new album. And in my anger and haste, after that disastrous magazine interview, I had been diligent. After every single session where I'd built a substantial ghost track, I had gone online and registered it, including the demo for Ashes and Glass. The next morning, I was in Maya's office. I was a different person from the grieving, defeated woman she had counseled a month before. I was calm, I was focused. I laid everything out on her polished glass desk, a list of the songs, printouts of the ASCAP registrations under Thea Evans, and a USB drive. He called my work perfectionism, I told her, my voice even. He said it was stifling his raw talent. Then he put that perfectionism on his lead single, and called it his own. Maya looked at the printouts, her eyes widening slightly. She put on a pair of sleek, black-rimmed glasses, and leaned in. Thea Evans, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. You clever, clever woman. This is beautiful. Is it legal? I asked. Is it defensible? Defensible. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Thea, this is an ironclad paper trail. You registered these arrangements contemporaneously. You used your legal maiden name. He claims he wrote these songs alone, but the performance rights organization, the very body that pays him, has a record of a co-writer. A co-writer who is about to be owed a significant chunk of public performance royalties the second this song gets played on the radio. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her chin. This was where her subplot began to surface, a detail she'd only hinted at before. You know, it reminds me of a case I'm fighting right now, at my own firm. Old guard partner, one of the founders. He takes my briefs, my legal arguments, changes a few words, and presents them to the senior partners as his own. He calls it mentorship. He says he's giving my work the polish and authority it needs. Sound familiar? I nodded. It sounded exactly familiar. I've been documenting it for a year, she continued, her eyes glittering with a familiar fire. Every email, every draft, every memo. I'm building a case not just for compensation, but for a partnership track he's been blocking me from. People like him, people like Jet, they don't just steal your work, they steal your future. They count on you being too tired, too scared, or too beaten down to fight back. They count on your silence. She looked at me, a newfound respect in her eyes. You didn't stay silent, Thea. You just spoke a language he couldn't be bothered to learn, the language of business. So what's the plan? That's when I pushed the USB drive across the desk. This is my leverage. Jet thinks my contributions were ephemeral, just some magic I sprinkled on. He's forgotten that I save everything. Every session file, every raw track. On this drive are the isolated audio files for every single ghost track I created. It's my voice, alone, singing the harmonies. It's my synth programming, my piano parts, my bass lines. It's the raw material he claimed to have channeled from the cosmos. It's irrefutable proof. Maya picked up the drive, holding it like it was a diamond. So we don't just have the paperwork, we have the product itself, separated from his raw talent. Exactly, I said. I don't want to stop the album. I want it to be a massive success. I want it to be the biggest album of his career. A wicked grin spread across Maya's face. You want him to fly as close to the sun as possible. I want him to be the phoenix, I said, a cold smile touching my own lips for the first time in months. And then I want him to see the bill for the wings. And our plan was simple. It was elegant. It was, in its own way, a perfect piece of engineering. We would do nothing. We would wait. Jet's entire divorce strategy was built on the premise that I was emotionally devastated and creatively irrelevant. My silence would confirm his belief. He would stride onto the world stage, promoting Phoenix Rising as his singular masterpiece, the testament to his unadulterated genius. He would do interviews, talk shows, magazine spreads, all reinforcing the narrative that he had shed his creatively stifling wife and been reborn. Every interview he gave, every time he used the words raw, unfiltered, or pure, he was unwittingly building our case. He was digging a hole for himself, lining it with press clippings and his own boundless ego. Maya and I would just sit back and watch him dig. The album dropped in October. The rollout was immense, and Jet's face was everywhere. On billboards, on the cover of Rolling Stone, on late-night television. The headline for the Rolling Stone piece was, "He be unshackling of Jet Striker." The article was a masterpiece of self-mythologizing. He talked about breaking free from creative constraints, about how, for the first time, his music was 100% him. He even took a thinly veiled shot at me. When you're in a long-term collaboration, he said, even a personal one, people's ideas can get tangled. You start to lose the thread of your own voice. This album was about finding that thread again. It's the most honest thing I've ever done. I read the article in my quiet apartment, a strange sense of calm washing over me. He was making this too easy. The critics, for the most part, bought it hook, line, and sinker. The reviews were ecstatic. They praised the album's newfound vulnerability and surprising sonic depth. One influential critic wrote, "While Stryker's past work was always powerful, Phoenix Rising has a haunting atmospheric quality that feels entirely new. It's as if by stripping everything away, he's found a deeper, more complex soul in his music." That line made me laugh out loud. A deep, barking laugh that startled my cat. He hadn't found a deeper soul. He had just stolen mine and neglected to read the return address. Ashes and Glass shot to #1. The album was certified gold in its first week. Jet was on top of the world, a living embodiment of his own comeback narrative. I imagined him celebrating with Kip and his new entourage, clinking champagne glasses and congratulating each other on their raw, unfiltered success. Meanwhile, I was living a quiet life. I had used some of the money from the sale of our house to set up a small but professional-grade mixing studio in the second bedroom of my apartment. I started taking on small projects for local indie bands, artists who were grateful for my expertise and happy to give me credit and fair pay. It was fulfilling work. It was honest. It felt like coming home to myself. My friend and lawyer Maya was having her own quiet revolution. Armed with her meticulously documented evidence, she had forced a meeting with the firm's managing partners. She laid out, calmly and factually, how her senior partner had systematically taken credit for her work, costing her bonuses and delaying her path to partnership. Faced with a lawsuit that would be both expensive and deeply embarrassing, the firm blinked. The old guard partner was quietly retired, and Maya was offered a junior partnership. She'd call me with updates, her voice buzzing with the thrill of the fight. "They underestimate us, Thea," she said one night. "They think our silence is weakness. They don't realize it's observation." Her victory was a shot in the arm for me. It was proof that the system, as broken as it was, could sometimes be forced to bend toward fairness, if you had the right leverage. The first royalty quarter ended on December 31st. According to ASCAP's payment schedule, the statements and checks would be generated in late January. I knew this. I had the date circled on my calendar. It felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. A bomb I had built myself, piece by piece. The first tremor came not as an explosion, but as a phone call. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of mixing a track for a young folk singer, a woman with a voice like honey and lyrics that could break your heart. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number with a Los Angeles area code. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Same number. I ignored it. When it buzzed a third time, I sighed, paused the track, and answered. Hello, is this Thea Evans? The voice was tight, stressed, and vaguely familiar. This is she. Who's calling? This is Arthur Klein. I am Jet Striker's business manager. The panic in his voice was a symphony of its own. Arthur, a nervous, perpetually sweating man, who had been managing Jet's finances for years. He always treated me with a kind of polite condescension, as if I were a beautiful but expensive vase Jet had acquired. Hello, Arthur, I said, my voice calm and level. It's been a while. Thea. I'm calling about the first quarter ASCAP statement for Phoenix Rising. There seems to be a substantial clerical error. A massive one, in fact. It's showing a huge co-writer payout to someone I've never heard of. Thea Evans. Given your maiden name, I was hoping you could shed some light on this catastrophic mistake before I spend the next 72 hours on the phone with ASCAP's legal department. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I let the silence hang in the air, imagining Arthur on the other end, probably mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. It's not a mistake, Arthur, I said, my tone as clean as a sine wave. There was a long pause. I could hear the sound of him breathing. A frantic, shallow little rhythm. What? What do you mean? It's not a mistake. I mean, Thea Evans is my legal name. I am the registered co-writer on several of the arrangements on that album. The statement is correct. I heard a sound on the other end of the line, like a chair scraping violently against a floor, followed by a muffled curse. That's impossible. The divorce decree is explicit. You have no claim on this album. Jet was very clear about that. We have it in writing. You're confusing two different things, Arthur, I explained, channeling Maya's calm, cutting precision. The divorce decree forfeits my claim to marital assets. It has absolutely no bearing on my pre-existing, independently registered songwriting and arrangement copyrights. Those are my intellectual property. They were never part of the marital pot. You, of all people, should know how performance royalties work. The silence that followed was even more profound. I had the distinct impression I had just completely and utterly destroyed Arthur Klein's afternoon, and possibly his career. He was the one who was supposed to catch things like this, but he, like Jet, had seen me as the wife, not as a professional, with a brain and a effing ASCAP account. How much? He finally whispered, his voice hoarse. How many songs? I believe the statement you have in front of you is quite detailed, I said sweetly. It should list them all. Ashes and Glass, for one. Midnight Kerosene, Scars in Stereo. About 8 tracks in total, if I recall. The percentages vary. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding, the frantic calculations. The album was a monster hit. Radio play was through the roof. The streaming numbers were astronomical. A co-writer's share of that would be staggering. It wouldn't be a nuisance payout. It would be a significant portion of the album's entire profit. Money that Jet and his label and his manager had already counted. Jet doesn't know, he breathed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of pure terror. No, I said. I imagine he doesn't, but I have a feeling you're about to tell him. I paused, letting him stew in the horror of that impending conversation. You have a good day now, Arthur. I hung up the phone. I sat there in my little studio, the half-finished folk song waiting on the screen. The silence in the room was absolute. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. Not really. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated, earth-shattering vindication. The ghost had just presented the bill, and the haunting was only just beginning. The fallout was not immediate, but it was seismic. I imagine the phone call from Arthur to Jet was the stuff of legend. I picture Jet, probably lounging by a pool somewhere, basking in his own glory. His phone ringing. He answers, expecting more praise. Another interview request. Instead, he gets Arthur Klein, his voice trembling, trying to explain that a ghost from his past has just materialized on a balance sheet and walked away with nearly a third of his brilliant solo income. My first direct contact from the blast zone came 2 days later. An email from Jet. The subject line was just my name, in all caps. The body of the email was a torrent of panicked rage. It was pure, unfiltered Jet, a stream of consciousness that veered wildly between accusations, threats, and bizarrely, moments of wounded confusion. What the hell did you do? Arthur is having a meltdown. He's talking about royalties, co-writing credits. This is insane. It's a trick. Some kind of vindictive, bitter scam. You were always so meticulous, so obsessed with details. Did you forge something? Did you hack the system? We had a deal. The end. The divorce was clear. You got the house. I got the music. Wait. I got the house. You got the car. See, I don't even remember. But the music was mine. Phoenix Rising is mine. How could you do this to me? To us, after everything? It was a masterclass in narcissistic deflection. It wasn't his fault for stealing my work. It was my fault for documenting it. I didn't reply. My silence was a vacuum, and he was being sucked right into it. The next phase of the antagonist panic came from the label. I got a call from a sharp, humorless woman in the legal department. She tried to play hardball. "Miss Evans," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "We've been made aware of a highly irregular claim regarding the writer's share on the Jet Striker album. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding that can be cleared up, but our position is that these claims are baseless and frankly fraudulent." I had Maya on speakerphone with me, muted. She had prepped me for this call. "There's no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "The arrangements were registered with ASCAP long before the album's release. The registrations are valid. I assume you've already confirmed that with them." There was a slight pause. She had. Of course she had. "Be that as it may," she pressed on, "Mr. Stryker is prepared to contest this in court. He maintains that he is the sole author of these works. A messy, public lawsuit is not in anyone's best interest." It was a threat, plain and simple. They would drag my name through the mud, paint me as a scorned ex-wife trying to cash in. They thought I would be intimidated. "Actually," I said, feeling a surge of Maya's confidence, "I think a public lawsuit is a fascinating idea. It would involve a process called discovery. That means you'd have to hand over the master session files for the entire album. And I, in turn, would be happy to provide the court with the isolated audio tracks of my work. We could play them for the jury. First, Jet's raw vocal and a single guitar. Then, we could add in my layered harmonies, my synth pads, my piano melodies. We could let the jury hear, with their own ears, exactly was contributed by the sole authors and what was contributed by me. And wonder what the press would make of that. The unshackling of Jet Stryker, wasn't that the headline? It's a great angle for a story. You could be. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I could hear the faint hum of my own studio monitors. The lawyer from the label had built her career on bullying and bluster. She had just run headfirst into a wall of meticulously organized evidence. "I see," she finally said, her voice stripped of all its earlier aggression. "I will have to discuss this with my colleagues." She hung up without another word. Maya unmuted her line. "Checkmate, Thea," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You didn't just show her your cards. You showed her that her entire deck is a house of lies." The real power shift, however, came from an unexpected place. It wasn't from the lawyers or the business managers. It came from the family. Jet's work family, that is, his band. The band consisted of 3 other guys: a stoic bass player named Marcus, a wild-eyed drummer named Leo, and a quiet, brilliant lead guitarist named Seth. They had been with Jet for years. They had also been there for countless late-night sessions. They had seen me, at the mixing board at 4 a.m., weaving my sonic tapestries while Jet was asleep on the couch. They knew exactly what I contributed. They had always been kind to me, treating me with a respect Jet never quite managed. When the divorce happened, they sent me polite, awkward texts, wishing me well. But they were Jet's band. Their loyalty, and their paychecks, were tied to him. About a week after my call with the label's lawyer, I got a call from a number I recognized. It was Seth, the lead guitarist. "Thea," he said, his voice hesitant. "Hey, it's Seth. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "Seth, hey." "Of course it's okay," I said, genuinely surprised. "Look, things are really weird over here," he said, his voice low, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Jet is losing his mind. He's canceling rehearsals. He's been screaming at Arthur on the phone non-stop. And the label is spooked. We heard about the ASCAP thing." I waited, letting him talk. "None of us were surprised," he said. And the simple validation in those words felt like a balm on a burn. "I didn't even know was still there. We were all in the room, Thea. We saw the work you did. When Jet started doing all that press about his raw solo vision, we all kind of looked at each other. It was bull. We knew it was bull. Why didn't you say anything?" The question was out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was quiet, not accusatory, just sad. He sighed heavily. "It's his name on the marquee, Thea. It's his show. It's not right, but that's the way it works. We have mortgages to pay. But this is different. He didn't just take credit. He tried to erase you, and he's acting like he's the victim. It's poisoning everything. The tour is supposed to start in 2 months, and he's in no shape to play. The vibe is just toxic." He paused, and I could hear the sounds of a city street in the background. He must have stepped outside to make the call. "Here's the thing. Marcus, Leo and I were talking. The label is talking about invoking the key man clause in our tour contract if Jet can't get his act together. But they're also floating another idea. They're looking at the numbers. The album is a hit because of its sound. A sound we all know. You were instrumental in creating." My heart started to beat a little faster. I had no idea where he was going with this. They asked us hypothetically, if Jet were to be indisposed, if we would be willing to tour the album with a different front person. He said, rushing the words out. And we said no. But we made a counter offer. We said we'd do it with you. I was speechless. "Me? Not as the singer," he clarified quickly, "but as the musical director, and maybe even mixing the live sound, bringing that magic to the stage." We told them the album's success is the songs, not just Jet's celebrity. And you're the one who knows the DNA of these songs better than anyone, including Jet. It was the most astonishing thing I had ever heard. His band, his family, was staging a quiet exodus. They weren't just leaving him. They were offering to cross the border and join my side. "Seth, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "Just know that you have allies. People who saw you. People who know the truth. Jet built his empire on your foundation, Thea. And the whole thing is starting to crumble." That night, the desperate counter-manipulation began in earnest. My phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Jet. He was drunk. I could hear it in the way he slurred his words, the overblown emotion in his voice. "Thea," he breathed into the phone. "Bae, I miss you. This is all just a misunderstanding. A stupid fight. It's money. Who cares about money? We made art together. That's what matters. The credit matters, Jet," I said, my voice cold and sober. "I'll give you the credit," he exclaimed, his voice suddenly loud and performative. "We'll call the press tomorrow. We'll tell them we co-wrote it. We'll say it was a tribute to our love. I don't know. We'll spin it. Just call this off. Call off the dogs. The label is looking at me like I'm a liability. My own band is talking behind my back. You're destroying me." "I'm not doing anything, Jet," I said. And it was the honest truth. "I'm just collecting payment for my work. You're the one who built your triumph on a lie. The only thing destroying you is the truth." "But I need you," he wailed. and the desperation in his voice was pathetic, stripped of all its rockstar bravado. The tour, the next album, how am I supposed to make it sound like that again? That sound, it's you. I don't know how to do it without you. And there it was, the confession. The one he would never have made if he wasn't cornered. It wasn't about his raw talent. It wasn't about his singular vision. It was about his dependency on my magic. A magic he had tried to steal and bottle for himself. But the bottle was empty, and the magician was gone. You should have thought of that, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy, before you decided to turn me into a ghost. I hung up the phone, the power shift now complete and absolute. He wasn't the rock star, and I wasn't the engineer anymore. I was the house, and he was the one haunting it. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic, public showdown. It didn't happen in a boardroom or a courtroom. It happened in my space, on my terms. A few days after his drunken, pleading phone call, my apartment buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked at the small, grainy video screen by my door. It was Jet. He looked terrible. He wasn't the preening rock god from the magazine covers. He was pale. His hair was a mess, and he was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He looked diminished. He looked like the man I had first met, before the fame and the ego had consumed him. For a moment, a pang of the old sympathy went through me. I almost didn't answer, but Maya's voice was in my head. Don't let him make his problem your problem. I took a breath and pressed the talk button. What do you want, Jet? His voice was hoarse. Please, Thea, just 5 minutes. I won't yell. I won't beg. I need to understand. This was the debatable character logic moment. A part of me screamed not to let him in, to handle everything through the lawyers. But another, deeper part of me knew that for this to be truly over, for me to be truly free, we needed to have this one last, face-to-face conversation. I needed to see him acknowledge the new reality he now inhabited. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not completely. It was about closure. Fine, I said. The door is unlocked. He came in and stood awkwardly in the small entryway, looking around my apartment. It was a world away from the sprawling, minimalist mansion we had shared. This place was cozy, lived in, filled with my things, books, plants, and the warm glow of vacuum tubes from a small amplifier in the corner. His eyes fell on the closed door to my studio. So this is it, he said, his voice quiet. Your new command center. It's my home, Jet, I said, not offering him a seat. You said you wanted to understand. Understand what? He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a bewildered pain I hadn't seen before. Why didn't you just tell me? Why the secret ASCAP stuff? Why let me make a fool of myself? If you felt you weren't getting credit, we could have talked about it. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was devoid of humor. Talked about it, Jet? I spent 10 years trying to talk about it. Every time I tried to explain my process, you'd call it my magic and change the subject. When I suggested putting my name as a producer, you said it would complicate the brand. When I begged you not to take that solo writing credit on Echo in a jar, you told me I was being sensitive. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a secret weapon. So I acted like one. I registered my work to protect it. That's not a betrayal, Jet. It's business. He flinched, as if the word businesses was a physical blow. It was never just business for us, Thea. You made it business when you had your lawyer draft a document ensuring I wouldn't see a single penny from your fresh start. I shot back, my voice still level, but with an edge of steel. You can't have it both ways. You can't treat me like an employee in the divorce, and then cry betrayal when I behave like a professional with a copyright. He had no answer for that. He just sank onto the edge of my sofa, burying his face in his hands. He looked so broken, so utterly defeated. The power in the room had shifted so completely. It felt like the laws of physics had been rewritten. The label is going to drop me, he mumbled into his hands. The tour is cancelled. Seth told them he'd rather work with you. I know, I said softly. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. And what? You're going to do it. You're going to take my band, my music, and go on the road without me? This was the moment, the culmination of everything. I walked over to my studio door and opened it. The room was small, but it was perfectly organized. The mixing console was glowing. I sat down in my chair, my throne, and powered up the main monitors. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice now amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. "You think this was all a plot to steal your career? You think I want to be you? I have never wanted to be you, Jet. I don't want the spotlight. I don't want the fame. I just want the credit for the work I did." I clicked a few times on my computer, pulling up a session file. It was labeled Ashes and Glass Ghosts. "You told the world this album was raw, pure, unfiltered you," I said. "Let's listen to what that actually sounds like." I soloed his tracks. The speakers blasted his powerful voice and the aggressive, distorted guitar riff. It was strong, yes, but it was stark. It was two-dimensional. It was thin. After about 30 seconds, I faded it out. "Now," I said, "let's listen to the ghosts." I muted his tracks and unmuted mine, and from the speakers flowed a sound that was at once beautiful and heartbreaking. It was my voice, layered 3 times, creating that ethereal, soaring harmony. It was the shimmering synth pad, a sound I had crafted from a recording of a wind chime I'd sampled in our old backyard. It was a subtle, pulsing bass line that gave the song its forward momentum. It was everything the critics had praised. It was the sonic depth. It was the haunting, atmospheric quality. It was the soul of the song, laid bare. I let it play through the whole first chorus. Jet just sat there, listening, his face ashen. He was hearing, for the very first time, the isolated sound of his own dependency. The magic trick was being explained, and it wasn't magic at all. It was skill, talent, and countless hours of work. It was my work. I faded the sound out, and the room was silent again. "That," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable, "is the new reality. You can't make that sound without me. Your label knows it, your band knows it, and now you know it. So you have a choice. You can go to court and have this exact demonstration performed in front of a jury and the entire world's press, or you can accept the terms." "What terms?" he whispered. "The ASCAP payments continue, undisputed. For any future use of those songs, my credit as co-writer and arranger is publicly and officially listed. And for the next album, if there is a next album, my role as co-producer will be contractual and non-negotiable from day one. Or you can go it alone. See how the raw, unfiltered version sells." He just stared at me, the arrogant, charismatic rock god, completely gone, replaced by a man who had been shown in no uncertain terms that the throne he sat on was built and owned by someone else. He had tried to erase me, but in the end, he had only managed to prove how essential I had been all along. The vindication was quiet, but it was absolute. So what happened next? Well, Jet, faced with professional and financial ruin, took the deal. There was no other choice. His statement to the press was a masterwork of spin, something about a rekindling of a creative partnership and a desire to formally acknowledge the contributions I had made all along. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie that served my truth. The royalty checks started arriving, and they were, as Arthur Klein had feared, substantial. But it was never really about the money. You know, it was about the credit. It was about respect. It was about him, and the world acknowledging that my work had value. The money was just the tool, the language that people like Jet and his label understood. It was the only way to make them listen. I didn't take the musical director job for the tour. That would have been too much. It would have felt like I was stepping into his shoes, and his shoes never would have fit me. I did, however, take a contract to consult on the live sound design, to ensure the sonic integrity of the album was represented properly on stage. I did it from my own studio, on my own terms, for a very, very handsome fee. Seth and the band made sure of that. The best part, though, wasn't the money or the public credit. It was the freedom. With the royalties, I bought a small commercial property, a beautiful old building with high ceilings and great acoustics, and I built my own dream studio. Not a home studio in a basement, but a proper business. I named it Ghost Track Studios. I put up a sign. I started producing albums for young artists, the kind of raw talent that just needed a guide, not a guru. I made sure every musician, every engineer, every single person who contributed got their credit, right there in the liner notes. I made it my mission to not be Jet. And Jet? Well, he and I have a working relationship now. It's cold, it's professional, and it's governed by a stack of contracts thick enough to stop a door. He sends me demos for the new album, and I send back my contributions. He's more subdued these days. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a grudging respect. He knows he needs me. He knows I have the ghosts, and he knows they'll only sing for me. It wasn't about revenge until it was. But in the end, the best revenge wasn't his failure, but my success. It wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building myself up on my own foundation. So that's my story. It's a story about sound and silence and the importance of knowing your own worth, even when the person closest to you refuses to see it. It's about understanding that your magic is actually skill, and that skill deserves to be recognized and protected. I want to ask you something. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something? A project, a relationship, a family, only to be treated like you were invisible? Have you ever been someone's secret weapon, kept hidden away until you were needed? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read them all, and I think it's important we share these experiences. It's how we learn that we're not alone. And if you're in a situation like I was, don't ever let anyone convince you that your contribution doesn't count. Document your work, register your copyrights, value your own magic, because sometimes the ghost in the machine is the one who ends up owning the whole company. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more stories about getting the justice you deserve. We all have a story to tell. It's time to make sure our voices are heard.